The time is 2 p.m. You're watching the Tuesday edition of Market View right here on Eswatini TV. My name is Nosile Sitole. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. Today, we take a closer look at a significant change in how government accounts for public funds. The government is moving towards adopting the International Public Sector Accounting Standards known as IPSAS. These standards now are designed to make public financial statements more transparent, reliable and easier to understand for all citizens, investors and international partners. During a workshop held at Sibayeni Lodge in Matapa, the represented Minister for Finance emphasized that IPSAS will align Eswatini with global best practices in public financial reporting. Now, to help us understand this change, Account Treasurer Stanley Ngobo will join us in the studio to break down what IPSAS is, why it matters, and how it will impact both government institutions and yourself. But first, our business stories this afternoon. In our business news, we begin with this. Eswatini has not yet entered the carbon market, but the country is laying the groundwork to take advantage of its low emissions footprint. Head of Trade at Business Eswatini, Musa Masego, shared this view during an interview at the Central Bank of Eswatini complex in Ezulwini, where stakeholders are undergoing training on carbon market mechanisms.
What carbon trading does, in essence, presents a new revenue stream. We already have targets as a country, particularly when it comes to reducing our carbon emissions, as we have indicated in the newly relaunched Nationally Determined Contribution. However, this then bridges that gap between particularly the financially feasible projects and those which perhaps need a bit of additional green financing so that we can actually hit those targets. What it also allows us to do is to build new relationships with countries that are net polluters. In the event that overall we do have excess carbon credits, we will be able to generate revenue stream, not just for the private sector companies, but also just for I think the economy in whole, because what this allows is the private sector to also work on developing the communities in which we work with. So that means access to newer, greener technologies, more grid connectivity for those communities, and overall an improved standard of living, which is what we're hoping ultimately this is what we'll get. But we do need to work together with our policymakers. We do understand that there's a draft climate change bill that's in the works. That's the regulatory instrument that really would allow the private sector to participate in this new global initiative.
The Chief Executive Officer of Eswatini Stock Exchange, Simanga Mdluli, details what carbon markets are.
Carbon credit market is a market just like any other that actually trades carbon credits. So carbon credits, basically the experts have found a way to actually quantify what carbon does to our atmosphere. And they actually quantified then as to if you reduce those emissions that we make in the atmosphere, the amount of savings and benefits that can be introduced to our atmosphere and our environment. So the carbon market really refers to the trading of these carbon credits, and this can be done both on the over-the-counter markets or on the regulated stock exchange like ours. And that's exactly why Eswatini Stock Exchange is here today, because the idea is that if we train our members, which are the stockbrokers, the market makers, also the entities that are actually regulated by the FSRA, being the asset managers, because these are the same people that actually go out there, teach and sell these carbon credits to the trading public or the investing public.
A local company specializing in gaseous emissions, solid waste, liquid waste and carbon markets shares their perspective on what should be done for businesses eyeing opportunities in the carbon markets.
Training is absolutely necessary in order to allow the stakeholders to understand exactly what carbon credits are, how carbon credits are generated, and how carbon finance can be sourced in order to fund carbon credit projects in the country. The laws are always needed in order to keep us all in check and to govern the industry. But we would say right now what is needed is for the industry to actually get started. The main reason that I say that is in order for a project to receive carbon finance, it needs to be unviable. Now, only unviable projects are eligible for carbon credit finance. And if the law is going to lead, these projects are definitely not going to be started or seen as interesting to project developers.
The Financial Services Regulatory Authority says global voluntary carbon market has surpassed over 36 billion emalangeni in value and is projected to grow exponentially as net zero commitments gain momentum across developed and emerging economies. Reporting, Nelson Dlangamandla, Vuminkosi Nzinisa, Ezulwini.
The Central Bank of Eswatini has, on behalf of the government, announced the issuance of the Government Infrastructure Bond, SGIFB 009, maturing on 31 October 2033 with a fixed coupon rate of 11.25%. The auction date, according to the Central Bank, is scheduled for the 28th of October 2025, and the total amount on offer is 200 million emalangeni. In a statement, the bank said this bond will be issued through a competitive multiple bid auction model and is open to the general public, including individuals, corporates and institutional investors. All applications must be submitted via the primary dealers, who are the 4 local commercial banks. The purpose of this issuance is to raise capital for infrastructure projects aimed at driving economic business and social development across the Kingdom of Eswatini. Interested parties are encouraged to contact their commercial banks for application forms or reach out to the Central Bank of Eswatini's Financial Markets Department. Right, and with that, we wrap up some of our business stories this afternoon. We'll go for a break. After that, our Enterprise Watch segment coming up.
Eswatini TV has signed a code of conduct that is enforced by the Eswatini Communications Commission. We are committed to reporting news that is accurate, comment that is fair, and programming that does not amount to hate speech or the description of gratuitous violence or explicit sex. For any complaints of our programming, please contact us on 2411-9600 or email info@eswatinitv.co.za. You can also contact the Eswatini Communications Commission on 2406-7000 or write a letter to ECCOM on PO Box 7811 Mbabane. Email address is info@ecom.org.sz.
Ngiphinza kwamukela ngolomhle sesiqhubeka nalo hlelo njengoba leSwatini selita usebenzisa hlelo lolusha lwendlela yokubika ngemali hulumende la isebenzisa ukusita sive kanye nasetinhlelweni letahlukene lolutawubuka tinhlangothi letahlukene International Public Sector Accounting Standards IPSAS kusukela ngenyanga yamabasa eminyakeni lotako. Lamuhla sikhulumisana naSanele Ngcobo loqhamuka eTreasury lotawusichazela kabanti ngalo hlelo. Nguvusele Ngcobo sikwamukele studio noma etindlini sata namhla emini kumele songasipha sithombe kude ukuthi umbukela acondzisise ukuthi kahle kahle nasikhuluma ngale IPSAS noma ke International Public Sector Accounting Standards sikhuluma ngemvolo enjengani.
Angibonge nothile ngiyathokoza kuniketwa leli thuba ku engage neMaswati ukukhuluma ngale topic lemqoka kangaka yama IPSAS njengoba bosowuchazile IPSAS it's International Public Sector Accounting Standards le kusisekelo sekuphathwa kwetimali lokuniketa sithombe lesikhanya kabanti kuna nasi lesi siniketa nyalo kule ndlela lesisebenta ngayo nyalo.
Ngabe yinje la kubonile uhulumende lokuthi afike lesinqumo sokuthi implement noma ke decide ukuthi by the next financial year si adopta yona le IPSAS?
Yes, lo kumcoka kakhulu lo kuthi timali tahulumende currently tibukwa ngesikhathi tingena noma tiphuma lokuya kubese kanzi lokungena nekuphuma kwato ngiyona ndlela lokhanza ukuthi uhulumende ukhulisa ingcebo yakhe ngempahla lethide layithengako. So currently kule reporting framework lesinayo nyalo uthola ukuthi iaddressa lokungena nekuphuma kwetimali ukuthi uhulumende uspende kanganani uthole imali lenganani lokunganiketi sithombe lesingiso. So ukubone kukuhle uhulumende weMaswati ukuthi athathe lolunyawo lolu ngoba lona lusinika sithombe lesikhanyako in the sense that uyakhona kubona ukuthi une impahla lenganani asengibekise nje currently kule report lekhona kude la kungavela khona ukuthi uhulumende in terms of buildings unamalini in terms of ama vehicles unamalini nyalo nje siyajabula uhulumende wethu kunale project yasempakeni siyabona ukuthi kuhamba malini kusikhosta malini ku engage kule project but kuya kubese kube babetela ukuthi nale seliphelele lidam li ivalue yalo imalini le kulombiko otimali wahulumende.
Indzaba ye kusebenta kwemali ya hulumende is very critical to kusosive seMaswati. Akusiyo ke phela ya hulumende yakwana noselesive legathi ukuthi nayibhadala mhlawumbe imithelo yaye bese seyibona ama services noma ke difference side kokuthi cha umthelo wamvele awuhambi mahala. Nasibuka le IPSAS le hulumende afise ukuthi I implemented by the next financial year. Engabe umuntu lobhadala ema-taxes just as they are whether ngusomabhizinisi noma nje uliswati ngitawuba nayo indlela ye-accessa leti impepha noma ke lo mbiko walo IPSAS lo ngitshela ukuthi cha imali yahulumende njengoba nami ngivele ngifake isandla a certain percentage of tax isebente kanje.
Ngiyabonga nothile ngumbuto lomuhle kakhulu loyo. Kuphendvula kungaba ngilokuthi vele hulumende ukhona because ufuna ukuseva abantu bakhe and inqhubekela phambili yahulumende ila ekuthenini utiphatha njani imali takhe. Ekuphatheni letimali takhe ngikona ke lokutabe seseku sitfonsela bo somabhizinisi ukwenza ukuthi nesive sesibane imisebenzi njenganyalo nje indzaba edibhedlela ukuthola ukuthi onke ama services sekaba kahle. So kuloku bese uhulumende kufuna account to the people. IPSAS ngisho nje ukuthi sethembiso for better accountability and transparency. With that being said, lama reports vele kungmanje noma ngabe ngibani uvumelekile ukuyithola ireport yahulumende, the annual treasury report yahulumende. Yes. So nakulo lokutako kude lokutawo bese kuyashintsha.
Okay.
Noma ngangibani utayitfola. And we are even sisenhlanhleni ukuthi sesiphila esikhathini sebuchwephesha lobusembili. Hulumende unalo likhasi lakhe nalapho kutawutholakala nje le mbiko timali. Yes.
Now buka the current reporting yetimali tahulumende and nale system lensha yini nje buhle bayo kakhulu kade ngoba phela sike sabona la tihloko tabo corruption ukuthi kube ne budget thithe but sisikhanza ukuthi lemisebenzi seyithatha more than what was actually allocated.
Lo kuhle kakhulu ngale reporting framework le sesi adopta manje kungukuthi sekuyawuba likhuni kufihla uma ngabe kunema issues la khona in terms of masikhulumela abo accountability and trustworthiness le ndlela lengiyo kulukhuni lokufihla imali kahulumende ukuthi sisebenze njani lokho kusho ukuthi i-report leta uphuma lapho seyiyawuba ngilene maciniso leta ube sesita i-decision making nakulabanyenti.
Okay.
Yes.
Le EPSAS currently Hulumende is en route to ukuthi sikhone ku monitor our spending as government, as a country. Sikhone ukuthi si rather invite or sikhone ku attract abahlanyeli imali even. Given this report, now cabanga ukuthi itasiqinisa yini or will it strengthen indlela lesime ngayo etimalini silive noma ke singulumende in terms of financial discipline?
Itasiqinisa kakhulu ngobe njengoba bengichazile leyawona ukuthi i-balance sheet yahulumende lokungilomunye lenye report kulombiko timali. Currently ayikuveti ukuthi impahla yahulumende ingimalini. That is your PPE, your property, plant and equipment. Kanti uhulumende unempahla leningi kakhulu. With that being said, once saba nale sa adopta kahle le framework le utawuthola ukuthi sesiyakhona nabona abatshali imali sekuyakhona kubaniketa sithombe lesikhanyako lesine sithembiso selikusasa lelichakazile for live leMaswati nemnotho nje wonke weMaswati.
Ngiyethemba lo sekutaba nalula nokuthi live libuke itikweleti devu sibhadala kanjani.
Yes, because nyalo sisibuka sikweleti ngathi sisilethela malini siboleka malini sisibuke namasesibhadala kepha kuloku sekuyawubalula ukuthi mhluzana sesiboleka sesiyawukwati probably 5 years into the future ukuthi sisikhosta malini lesikweleti sivele nala kulombiko timali. Yes.
Kuchinja from one way yekusebenta to another is very difficult in any profession. So now nasibuka lokuthi emabhuku bekahlolwa pheze futhi kupotwe ngalendlela le nyalo sekumele kushinje ahlolwe apotwe, everything needs to be accounted for on paper. Kube ngiloyo naloyo akhona ku-access leyo document leyo or that kind of financial report. Now libuka lo hlelo leli engabe uhulumende ulungiselela kanjani ukuthi onke lamatiko njengoba anjalo akhone ku transition, which actually I would think is a more of a technical transition.
Yes, of course it is a technical transition and inkulu kakhulu. So uhulumende uyilungiselele ngalendlela ukuthi utamile kubuka abantu labathini wabahlukanisa kwaba imikhakha kubuka ukuthi bangakhi babo bani labatawuthini bangilolishinjo leli futhi litabathinza kanjani. Ngaleyo ndlela ke ube sesokwenda lihlelo njengoba currently there's an ongoing workshop, a high level workshop lapho khona si engage abantu ngobe bantu bulukhuni belishinjo noma ku rejecta kwebantu lunangabe kunelishinjo lelisha lelikhona akubangelwa ukuthi mhlambe abafuni kulesinye isikhathi it's the lack of information. So uhulumende arrange ke lama workshops, the change management workshops la khona lama groups lesengiwashito atawa engage group by group ukuthi logu why the change kutasita kuphi.
I did mention earlier ukuthi Hulumende is on a route to attracting foreign direct investment for the country. Nasasibuka lo hlelo, how do you see it influencing budlelwane bethu lesinabo silive ne tinintelive donors or partners or even leto tinhlangano lestikhanza ukuthi silive siyayisiboleke imali kithu?
Kutasisita ikakhulu ngobe asengiphenze nje ngikubeke ukuthi kule framework le mina ngingayichaza in simpler terms ukuthi it is a universal language, financial language. So tinintetfu letikhona mhlaba wonke tiyawube se kuba melula to relate nema financials akangwane nekwakha ema decisions on how much to invest and how to invest, in which sector to invest in the Kingdom of Eswatini. Yes.
Sesephetha Ngobo, what's the assurance leniniketa eMaswati? Individuals or bosoma business ukuthi le IPSAS, it's not just a change lepaliwe administrative on paper, but it's actually one letawubita ukuthi vele as asachuba kusebenta kwakhe uhulumende kube ibe khona le accountable financial governance.
Ngingasho nje ukuthi vele ubeka yona lokuthi this is not just an administrative change, but it is a foundation for accountability. Ngoba engiloko lokumqoka kakhulu singaqinisekisa nje eMaswatini ukuthi uma sesithathe lolunyawo lolu salithatha kahle ngoba kona akusiyo info longayenda in 1 2 3 days or kutawuthatha isikhathi kodwa kuyawube sekuba nendlela ukuthi aMaswati abone ukuthi imithelo yawo ishona kuphi.
I know I said that was my last one, but you mentioned ukuthi kutawuthatha isikhathi. So nasesibuka ukuthi iyaqala iya-adopt or implementwa next year, just the full implementation across board, across onke lamatiwa ohulumende, how much time will it take really?
I-precedence masibuka emaveni la kayithethe le ndlela uyaye ukhanza ukuthi bathethe 10-15 years. Kodwa ke sesisenhlanhleni thina ngobe labahambe embili sesiyakhona ukuthekela lwati kibo ukuthi basichushise ukuthi kuhamba kanje si avoid ema mistakes laba wendile nema obstacles laba wafacile. Lokho ke kusenda ukuthi ngisho ukuthi thina kuyabe we are expecting ukuthi by 31st of March 2028 sibe sesiqalile si comply with the IPSAS framework
Fully.
Yes.
Siyabonga kakhulu. Ngobo lo ngomhlengo sanele ngobo account treasury asichazela kabanti ngehlelo lesaluthola ngohulumende lokubika ngekusebenta kwemali tembuso international public sector accounting standards sitawuthatha likhefu nasibuya sikhulumisana nasomnotho sanele sibiya.
Hi, I'm Alex. Let's talk about banks. Specifically, central banks. Believe it or not, they're really important to our everyday lives. Central banks manage the flow of money in a country's economy, so things don't go haywire. They're typically part of the government, although they should operate independently. The specific roles of central banks vary from country to country, but they usually have a few key responsibilities. Mainly, they're in charge of monetary policy to keep prices stable. One way they do this is through what's called the interest rate, which is the cost of borrowing money. Central banks lower interest rates, making credit cheap to boost the economy. Because when credit to buy things, such as homes, food, and cars gets cheaper, people tend to buy more. And who doesn't love that? But when prices get too high, central banks can raise rates, making money more expensive to borrow. This can slow growth, but it also brings down prices. Central banks also buy and sell foreign currency. They can do this to weaken or support the value of their own currency. Stability isn't just about keeping prices steady. That's why central banks also play a key role in preserving financial stability. For example, if a commercial bank is in trouble, a central bank can give them a loan, but only as a last resort. Central banks have been using all of these tools to help keep things stable for hundreds of years. Okay, so why am I telling you this? Well, whether you're buying bread, or a pomegranate, or even starting a business, that stability is important for all of us. And here at the IMF, a big part of our job is providing policy advice that can help central banks all over the world meet their price and financial stability goals.
Eswatini TV has signed a code of conduct that is enforced by the Eswatini Communications Commission. We are committed to reporting news that is accurate, comment that is fair, and programming that does not amount to hate speech or the description of gratuitous violence or explicit sex. For any complaints of our programming, please contact us on 2411-9600 or email info@eswatinitv.co.za. You can also contact the Eswatini Communications Commission on 2406-7000 or write a letter to ECCOM on PO Box 7811 Mbabane. Email address is info@ecom.org.sz.
Welcome back to the program now for our market analysis segment. In-house economist Anele Sibia joins me in studio. A very good afternoon to you, Mr. Sibia. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to start here. The Q2 gross domestic product report by the Ministry of Economic Planning indicates a growth of 3.4% year on year. Can you break it down for us?
Thank you, Notsile. So what we're seeing right now is when you move from Q1 to Q2, from Q1 we saw a 0.6% growth, when you compare it year on year. And then now we're seeing a 3.4% growth compared year on year in terms of GDP. What we're seeing is a rebound in the secondary sector and also in the tertiary sector. But the primary sector remains subdued, at negative 9%. Right. So that shows that agriculture, mining and forestry is continuing to face a bit of pressure, and we've seen this coming through, more especially from the coal miners in terms of that expectation. But we do expect that probably this, in terms of agriculture, is what you call a transient or seasonal type of phenomenon, and we do hope that going forward we are going to see that growth, accelerating, and we do expect to see even a further acceleration in the tertiary sector as government finalizes the salary review. Yes. And they release that to the public, so we do expect to see that driving demand through the retail and also the wholesale sector. We do also expect the secondary sector to rebound even further in Q3, as we are seeing that, the expansion of those capital expenditures and those big mega programs coming into implementation. But there are a bit of worries around the primary sector. Right.
Now back to the reason why you're here for our market analysis segment. In as much as we don't have the graphic today, that's just for our viewers to know what's actually happening today, what's moving markets.
So in the U.S., we're seeing overall positive growth, largely driven by, that investor sentiment around the calming of tensions around the tariffs between the U.S. and China. But when we move across the globe to Europe, what we're seeing today is a bit of a weakening activity, overall, with losses from London through to Paris, with Paris, signaling a much bigger loss position, purely because the compounds with the political crisis within Paris, and overall consumer investor sentiment in the Eurozone and also in Europe is weakening. But we are watching for Thursday to see those figures come out in terms of UK inflation. And then when we move on to Asia, we're seeing a bit of, again, consumer investor sentiment really being slow there, with a bit of profit taking from the Shanghai Composite, from Nikkei, and then Shanghai and China. Again, investor sentiments there remain very weak, largely driven by those tensions between China and the US, until and unless we get something more definitive in terms of where the tariffs are going to go and what it means. So we do expect consumer confidence investor confidence to stay a bit low in that part of the globe. In South Africa, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange still remains relatively relatively robust, but we've seen a couple of losses there. I think it's resting at 109 overall in terms of the all-share index, largely driven by the fact that, you know, the mining sector is actually suffering globally. Though gold continues to shine and glitter, but the overall losses within the sector, more especially within the coal miners, are actually pulling the sector down. And then in the domestic stock market, we've not seen any changes. You know, when you look into the commodities, gold remains at above 4,000. I think it's at 4.2 today, and the Brent crude is at $60 per barrel. I know that signals a bit of, you know, the market, the futures market is somehow pricing in a bit of weakness in demand, and also a bit of you know, output, excess output, because we've seen OPEC countries raising their output to accommodate an envisaged demand surge, which now we seem not to be seeing that. And then the currency overall is weakening across all major currencies, largely driven by the fact that the miners are not performing very well within the JSE.
All right, Sibia, thank you so much for your insights. That was in-house economist Sanele Sibia helping us make sense of the day's trade. Otherwise, this is the part where we wrap up the show. Until next time, thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.